Okay, so picture this. A woman walks into an office, gets a data entry job she is absolutely overqualified for, sits down, and immediately starts watching one specific man. Not because she likes him, not because she wants him, not because this is some slow burn workplace romance where he's going to win her over with coffee and emotional availability. No. She picked him deliberately, the way a predator picks a target. That woman is Jane, and this book, Jane Doe by Victoria Helen Stone, is basically what happens when the scariest person in the room is also the one you cannot stop cheering for. Because Jane is not your typical thriller heroine. She is not innocent, she's not soft, she's not someone who accidentally stumbles into danger and has to fight her way out. Jane is the danger. She tells us early on, and without any drama, that she is a sociopath. She understands people by observing them, studying them, and figuring out exactly which emotional buttons to press. Reading from her point of view is one of the most fascinating parts of this book because she's so cold, so blunt, and so casually vicious in her observations. There is no second guessing, no spiraling, just calculation. But here is the thing. This is not a story where the sociopath is automatically the villain, because the man she is targeting, oh, he deserves it. His name is Stephen Hepsworth, and he's one of those men who is terrifying precisely because he's not terrifying at first glance. He's not a dramatic serial killer lurking in the shadows. He's not an obvious villain with a creepy mansion and a sinister laugh. He is much worse than that. He is normal. He is a middle manager. He smiles. He goes to church. People like him. He probably thinks of himself as a good man because he has mastered the performance of goodness in public. But underneath all that, Stephen is controlling, misogynistic, self-righteous, hypocritical, and deeply, deeply pathetic. And Jane knows it. From the moment she enters his orbit, she starts becoming exactly the kind of woman Stephen wants. Meek, vulnerable, a little insecure, a little wounded, someone he can feel superior to. Someone he can guide. Someone he can slowly, quietly control. Except the joke is entirely on him because every single thing Jane does is calculated. Every smile, every blush, every shy little glance, every moment where she lets him think he has the upper hand, she is building the trap while he's congratulating himself for catching her. And the reason Jane is doing all of this comes down to one person, Meg. Meg was Jane's best friend, maybe the only person Jane ever truly loved, or at least the closest thing to love that Jane is capable of. And Meg is dead. As the story unfolds, we learn that Stephen was not just a random target. He was Meg's ex-boyfriend, the man who emotionally dismantled her piece by piece, the man who judged her, controlled her, humiliated her, and still managed to frame himself as the victim the whole time. So Jane comes back to Minneapolis with a plan. She's not there for closure. She is not there to heal. She is there to make Stephen pay. And honestly, some people earn exactly what's coming to them. Now, before we get into the full recap, this is going to be heavily spoiler heavy, because the entire fun of this book is watching Jane slowly infiltrate Stephen's life, expose the rot festering underneath his perfect church boy image, and figure out the most satisfying possible way to destroy him. So, if you want to go into Jane Doe completely blind, this is your warning. Pause here, come back after. But if you are here because you love revenge stories, morally grey women, toxic men getting exactly what they deserve, and the narrators who are somehow both terrifying and hilarious, then let's get into it. Because Jane Doe is not just a revenge thriller. It is a dark, sharp, weirdly emotional story about grief, female rage, hypocrisy, and what happens when the woman everyone underestimates turns out to be the one person in the room who should never, ever be underestimated. Okay, before we get into the actual revenge, we need to slow down and talk about the people in this book. Because plot aside, and yes, there is a plot and there is revenge, there is manipulation, there is very satisfying amount of one specific man losing everything, none of it lands the way it does without the characters. So let's start with Jane. Jane is cold, like genuinely cold. She watches people the way a scientist watches a specimen. She clocks your weaknesses, your patterns, the little insecurities you think you're hiding, and she files all of it away for later. She lies without blinking. She performs emotions she does not actually feel. She manipulates people so naturally it reads almost like breathing. And she will be the first one to tell you that Jane does not do the whole misunderstood secretly soft thing. She tells us straight up, she is a sociopath. She does not connect the way other people connect. She does not spiral the way other people spiral. She does not understand why someone would stay with a person who treats them like garbage or keep forgiving a family member who has shown them over and over again exactly who they are. And look, on paper, that sounds disturbing. But then she actually says these things out loud and you're sitting there like, wait, that's just sense. That is the thing about Jane. She does not perform goodness. She does not shrink herself to make other people comfortable. She does not apologize for taking up space. And yeah, she is terrifying. But there is also something weirdly freeing about being in her head because she is not drowning in the stuff that drowns most of us. She is sharp, she's funny, she is loyal in her own brutal way. And she has this strange, skewed moral code that somehow makes her one of the most rootable characters I've read in a long time. Which makes a lot more sense when you meet Stephen. Stephen Hepsworth is not a scary villain. That is the whole point. He does not have a dark lair. He does not monologue. He is a middle manager with a clean house and a church pew and a smile that works on most people. He is ordinary. And that is exactly what makes him horrifying. Because Stephen has built his entire identity on the idea that he is one of the good ones. He goes to church, therefore he is moral. He has a respectable job and a tidy life, therefore he is superior. He is the guy who probably describes himself as a gentleman and means it completely unironically. But get him alone with a woman he thinks he can control and watch how fast that image cracks. He's condescending, he is misogynistic in that quiet, insidious way that is somehow worse than loud and obvious. He wants women small, insecure, grateful, and a little bit ashamed. He wants the warmth and the sex and the emotional labor, but he also wants to punish women for giving him those things. He is the guy who pushes for intimacy and then uses it against you. He sees women as either worthy of his respect or worthy of his contempt. And the line between these two things is razor thin and entirely controlled by him. And he thinks he is the victim. Genuinely, deeply. That is the part that will make you want to throw the book across the room. Now, Meg. Meg is dead before the story starts, but she is in every single page of it. She was Jane's best friend. And I know what you might be thinking. Jane, a sociopath, having a best friend? But that is what makes it hit so hard. Jane does not love easily. Jane barely connects. But Meg got through. Meg was everything Jane was not. Warm, open, hopeful, and somehow that worked. Somehow Meg made Jane feel like she belonged somewhere. And then Stephen got to her. He picked Meg apart slowly, made her feel unstable, made her feel dirty and stupid and unlovable. He did it quietly, the way men like him always do, until Meg believed his version of her more than anyone else's. Jane does not grieve the way most people grieve, but she grieves Meg. And what she does with that grief is what this entire book is built on. Then there is Luke, who is basically the palate cleanser between every scene with Stephen. Luke is Jane's old college connection, and he is just decent. That's it. He's kind, he's easy, he makes her laugh without trying. He's happy to see her and doesn't want anything gross from it. And for Jane, who spends most of this book performing and calculating and managing, that is genuinely disorienting. Stephen makes Jane smaller because that is his preference in women. Luke just lets her exist. And then there is the cat. Yes, the cat Jane adopts. This grey cat who is by all accounts deeply unbothered by everyone and everything around her. Elegant, aloof, mildly judgmental. Jane takes one look at this animal and immediately feels a kinship, which is both hilarious and kind of beautiful. But here is the thing. The cat is not just a bit. The cat shows us that Jane, underneath all the ice, wants something. She wants warmth. She wants to come home to something. She won't call it that. She would probably find that framing annoying, but it's there. And when you step back and look at all of them together, Jane, the predator with a wound she'll not name, Stephen, the hollow man who believes his own performance, Meg, the ghost this whole story is for, Luke, the door left slightly open, and the cat, who frankly has the best energy in the book, you realize this is not just a revenge story with good pacing. It is a story about grief, wearing the skin of a thriller. It is about what happens to rage when it has nowhere to go. And it is about one very cold, very calculated woman deciding that if the world is not going to hold Stephen accountable, she will do it herself. Okay, so now that we know who everyone is, let's talk about how this whole thing actually gets started. Because the setup of this book is genuinely one of my favourite parts. Jane doesn't stumble into this. This is no accident, no coincidence, no moment where she trips and falls into Stephen's orbit.
Nope.
She walks in with a plan already formed, a costume already picked out, and a level of patience that is honestly a little unnerving. She takes a data entry job at Stephen's office. And from the outside, sure, new girl, quiet, polite, keeps to herself, nothing unusual. Except Jane is a lawyer, a successful one. She has money, a career, a whole life she has put on hold. She's sitting at that desk doing basic admin work, not because she needs the job, but because Stephen is there. Full stop. And the moment she walks in, she starts building. Now, we touched on the fact that Jane shapes herself into what Stephen wants, but what is actually fascinating is how she figures out what that is. Because she doesn't guess, she watches. She clocks the way he moves through the office, the way women respond to him, the way his chest puffs out just slightly when someone laughs at his joke. She reads him like a set of instructions. And what the instructions say is this: this man wants a woman he can feel bigger than. Not attractive, not impressive, not someone who challenges him, someone who needs him. So that is what Jane becomes. Soft dresses, a hint of financial stress, a vague, bad breakup she drops just enough detail about to make him feel trusted. A little hesitation before agreeing to things because she knows that if she says yes too easily, he'll get bored.
Yeah.
Just enough uncertainty to make him feel like the steady one. And Stephen falls for it completely, which honestly is not surprising, but it is depressing. Because this is the thing about men like Stephen. They don't want a relationship. They want a dynamic. They want to be the one with the answers, the stability, the superior taste. They want to be the one doing the choosing, the one extending the invitation, the one graciously allowing access. So Jane gives him all of that, on purpose. She lets him comment on what she eats. She lets him subtly talk down her taste in books. She lets him position himself as someone whose opinions are more refined, more correct, more worth listening to. She absorbs it all without flinching, not because she believes any of it, but because pushing back too early would close the door. And here's where it gets heavy, because the more you watch Jane perform all this, the more you think about Meg. Meg was not performing. That's the gut punch underneath the whole setup. Everything Jane is faking, the softness, the insecurity, the need for approval, Meg actually felt. Meg genuinely wanted to be loved. Meg genuinely believed people were good. And Stephen took all of that real vulnerability and used it to hollow her out.
What?
Jane is wearing the costume Meg lived in, and that changes the entire texture of every scene. So while Stephen is busy enjoying this new woman who seems so refreshingly easy to impress, Jane is doing what she actually came to do. Every lunch, every conversation, every moment, she lets him think he has gained a little more ground. It is all data collection. What does he value? What embarrasses him? What does he hide? What makes him feel untouchable? What are the cracks? She's not falling for him.
Nope.
She's building a file. And the inner narration during all of this is so good because Jane is not dramatizing any of it. She's not seething with rage in every scene. She is not trembling with grief. She is just methodical, clinical, occasionally very funny in the driest possible way. She'll describe some deeply manipulative things she just did and follow it up with an observation about human behavior that is so accurate it makes you uncomfortable. That is what makes the setup work as well as it does. It is not just a revenge fantasy. It is a slow, detailed, almost anthropological study of how a man like Stephen operates, and how someone who understands manipulation at a structural level can take that apart from the inside. Stephen thinks he is the one making moves. He thinks he spotted a vulnerable woman and made her feel safe. He has no idea that every door he thinks he opened, Jane already unlocked from the other side. And by the time we are deep into the setup, the details of what happened to Meg are still coming out slowly, which is the right call because it keeps the weight of this from feeling like backstory. It feels alive, it feels present. Every new thing we learn about Meg lands harder because we are already invested in Jane, already watching her work, already understanding what this is really about underneath all the calculated smiling. Stephen is not dealing with a woman he got to. He is dealing with the consequence of what he did. He just doesn't know it yet. Okay, so this is the part where Stephen stops just being annoying and starts being genuinely stomach-turning. Because the deeper Jane gets into his world, the more the book starts peeling back what he actually is underneath that respectable packaging. And it's not pretty. It's not even interesting. It is just ugly. Small. Ugly and small in the way that specific kind of man always is once you get close enough. Let's start with the church. Because you cannot talk about Stephen without talking about the church. And not in a vague way, in a very specific structural way. Stephen's father is a pastor. Stephen did not just grow up religious, he grew up inside a whole ecosystem that was built to reward men like him. Respectability, family values, public goodness, the performance of morality as a substitute for actually having any. And Stephen absorbed every bit of it. He uses his faith the way some men use a LinkedIn profile. It is not about belief, it is about image management. It tells people, I am stable. I am trustworthy. I have standards. It gives him a framework where he gets to be the authority, where he gets to decide what is good and what is shameful, where women are either worthy of his respect or deserving of his judgment. And the line between those two things shift entirely based on what is convenient for him in the moment. He wants sex. The women who want sex are dirty. He wants intimacy. The women who offer it too easily are suspect. He wants control dressed up as care, and he has a whole moral vocabulary to justify it. And Jane sees every bit of this from 10 feet away. She goes to church with him. She meets his father. She watches how Stephen performs in that environment. Straighter posture, warmer smile, this whole carefully calibrated version of himself that the congregation sees. And then she watches how that same man talks to her in private, the little comments, the digs that arrive dressed as jokes, the way he chips at things, her food, her body, her apartment, her taste, her cat. Oh, and he mocks her for getting a cat, which tells you everything. Every time she reacts, he resets. He was joking. She's being sensitive. She's pouting. She's misunderstood. The problem is never what he said. The problem is always her reaction to it. It is textbook. It is depressing. It is so recognizable it makes your skin itch. That is the thing that starts hitting differently the longer this goes on. Because Jane is performing all of this. She is choosing to absorb it. Every time she softens her response, every time she lets a dig land without pushing back, it is a deliberate move. She knows the game. She knows the rules. She's playing it on purpose. Meg did not have that. Meg was not playing a game. Meg genuinely loved him. Meg genuinely believed the version of Stephen that he showed her at the beginning. The charming one, the attentive one, the one who made her feel chosen. And by the time the real version started showing up, she had already been reshaped around him. Already started second-guessing herself. Already started absorbing his version of her as if it were true. This is what he does. He doesn't break people loudly. He just quietly convinces them that they were already broken. And as Jane digs deeper, we start getting more of what Stephen did to Meg. The specifics, the slow erosion. He made her feel stupid, irresponsible, unstable. He made her feel like she was constantly getting things wrong, and he was constantly tolerating it. He framed his control as patience, his contempt as concern, his cruelty as honesty. There is something particularly gutting about the moments where Jane remembers Meg defending him, Meg explaining him, Meg trying to make sense of the way he treated her, not because she was naive, but because she wanted to believe in people. She wanted to believe in him. And Stephen used that want as a lever. But here is the part that really does it. After Meg passes, Stephen talks about her, and there is nothing there. No grief that resembles grief. No weight. No accountability. Just, she was unstable. She was difficult. She did this to punish him. Her death in his telling is something that happened to Stephen. He can't even let her have that. He took everything from her while she was alive and then took the narrative after she was gone. And that is when any remaining ambiguity about what Stephen is disappears completely. Because this is not a man who made mistakes and carries them. This is a man who does not register what he did as something that needs carrying. He genuinely believes women are the problem. What? He genuinely believes that any woman who falls apart after being with him was defective to begin with, which means he'll do it again. Stephen is not dangerous because of one bad relationship. Stephen is dangerous because he's going to keep going. He's going to keep finding women who seem soft enough, keep wearing them down, keep walking away clean. And because he looks like the way he looks, stable, church-going, polite, the kind of man people want to believe in, most people will keep letting him. Most people will side with the clean house and the steady job and the respectable smile. Most people will decide the women were probably unstable. And that is when Jane's revenge stops being just satisfying to watch and starts feeling genuinely necessary. Not as a fantasy, not as a thriller hook, as the only logical response to a man who is never going to be held accountable by anyone else. Stephen is not a dramatic villain. He is not a monster in a way that makes people uncomfortable enough to act. He is the kind of man who gets away with it because he has perfected the appearance of not being the kind of man who does this. A hypocrite, a coward, a small man who needs women diminished to feel like anything at all. And Jane is done watching him walk around like he has earned that respectable life. So, time to take it apart. Okay, the revenge. This is what we have been building toward.
Yeah.
By this point, Jane has had enough. She's been inside Stephen's life long enough to know where the walls are thin. She knows what he values, what he protects, what would actually hurt versus what he would just brush off and blame on the woman who said it. And here is the thing about Stephen that Jane understands better than anyone. You cannot get to him through guilt. You cannot get to him through confrontation. You cannot make a man like Stephen sit with what he did, because men like Stephen have a very efficient internal system for making everything someone else's fault. Confront him and he becomes the victim. Call him out and suddenly you are the unstable one, the emotional one, the one who cannot let things go. So Jane doesn't go anywhere near his conscience. She goes after his image.
Nice.
Specifically, she goes after the church, because that is where Stephen's whole identity lives, not in his relationships, not in his private life, in the version of himself that his father's congregation sees every Sunday. The respectable son, the good Christian man, the upstanding member of a community built entirely on the public performance of virtue. Take that away and there's nothing left to protect. So Jane keeps digging, gets closer to the family, gets into the house, watches the dynamics. And this is where the story gets genuinely messy in the best way. Because it turns out Stephen's perfect church family has its own rot sitting right underneath the surface. Stephen slept with Rhonda, his stepmother, his father's wife, the same man who called Meg a whore, the same man who shames women for sex while pressuring them into it, the same man who sits in a church pew every week performing moral superiority. That man had an affair with his own stepmother. I mean, the audacity. The audacity! And what makes it so satisfying is not just the hypocrisy of it. It is that this is exactly the kind of secret that cannot survive exposure in the one environment Stephen has built his entire self-image around. He can survive women disliking him. He can absorb private failure because he's very good at rewriting it, but walk that information into his father's church and watch what happens to the respectable son image he has been hiding behind his whole life. Jane doesn't try to beat Stephen by being better than him. She beats him by understanding his world better than he does. She knows the system that protects him, and she doesn't try to appeal to it. She just removes it, pulls the flaw out, takes the one thing he has never had to live without, the benefit of the doubt, and makes sure that he does not have it anymore. And that is genuinely brilliant. Now, I'll be honest about the one thing that did not fully land for me. The revenge moves fast. Like, once Jane has what she needs, it goes. And part of me wanted to sit in that longer. After spending so much of the book watching Stephen operate in slow, grinding, miserable detail, I wanted the dismantling to take its time. I wanted to feel every brick come loose. I wanted more of Jane watching him realize, more of that controlled satisfaction she would absolutely have in that moment. But then I thought about it more and I get what the book is doing, because this is not that kind of revenge story. Stephen is not a cinematic villain. He doesn't have a grand empire to dismantle. He's just a man with a carefully maintained reputation and a community willing to look the other way. The hypocrisy is not buried deep. It is right there, barely hidden, just never challenged. Jane does not need an elaborate scheme. She just needs to make sure the right people cannot keep pretending they did not see it. The revenge is quick because the rot was always close to the surface. It just needed someone willing to drag it into the light. And this is what makes the ending work, even if it moves faster than you want it to. Because this book was never really about the revenge as a spectacle. The revenge is almost secondary to everything that came before it. The grief, the rage, the slow, careful study of how a man like Stephen operates, and why he keeps getting away with it. The satisfaction is not in watching him fall dramatically. It is knowing that the shame he used as a weapon against women for years is now sitting entirely with him. He spent his whole life positioning women as the dirty ones, the crazy ones, the ones who should feel guilty, the ones who should be grateful he tolerated them at all. And Jane just made sure that the story does not work anymore. Whatever he says now, whatever version of events he tries to spin, the people who matter to his image know the truth. And that is the thing about men like Stephen. Take away the audience and there is nothing left. Jane knew that from the beginning. She just waited until she had everything she needed to prove it. Alrighty, here are my final thoughts. I give this book 4 stars. I genuinely had a great time. Here is what I will say about Jane Doe as a reading experience. It is one of those books that moves fast, but not because it is shallow. It moves fast because Jane's voice pulls you through it. You don't realize how much ground you have covered until you are already at the end wondering, why is it not longer? And that is honestly my main complaint. Not that anything was badly done, just that I wanted more of it. More time inside Jane's head, more of her dry, clinical, occasionally hilarious observations about the world. More of the slow burn before everything lands. When you are that invested in a narrator, you just want the book to keep going. But what it does deliver, it delivers well. The thing that stuck with me most after finishing is how effectively this book uses Jane's emotional detachment to actually create emotion in the reader. Jane is not the one feeling things messily. We are. She describes what happened to Meg in this flat, precise, almost documentary way, and somehow that makes it land harder than if it had been written with maximum sentimentality. The restraint is what hurts. That's good writing. And I think the book also does something quietly smart with the question of what justice actually looks like for women dealing with men like Stephen. It doesn't pretend there is a clean, institutional answer. It doesn't send him to prison in some tidy legal resolution. It just removes his protection, strips the image, makes sure the right people cannot keep looking away. Is that justice? Is that enough? The book doesn't really answer that directly, and honestly, I respect it for not trying to. Because the honest answer is complicated. What I will say is this. The ending satisfied me emotionally, even when it left some of those bigger questions open. I wanted Stephen to feel it, and he did. I wanted the thing he valued the most to be the thing that broke, and it was. That is enough for 4 stars from me. Would I recommend it? Yes. Specifically if you're in a mood for something that is fun and dark and fast, but also has a little more going on underneath than your average revenge thriller. If you like narrators who are difficult to categorize morally, if you like female characters complicated rather than palatable, if you find yourself genuinely energized by watching a specific type of man get exactly what it deserves, this book is for you. If you need your protagonist to be warm, traditionally likable, or emotionally available in a conventional way, Jane is going to frustrate you. And that's okay. She is just not built for everyone. And for what it's worth, the cat absolutely deserved her own spin-off. Iconic from start to finish. No notes. Jane Doe is sharp, addictive, and a little bit mean in the best way. Stephen deserved worse. Jane delivered enough. Have you read this book? What are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!